welcome to Issues, a program that explores topics affecting Wilmington and you, the people who live, work, and visit this wonderful city. I'm your host, John Rago, and on today's program, the issue is reentry. What happens when those who are incarcerated finish their sentences, are released, and then reenter society? Are they prepared to return to the community? Do they have housing and employment? What's the government's role in all of this? And what's to stop a person from getting involved again in bad habits and associations? Well, here to explore this multifaceted issue of reentry are Charles Madden, the Executive Director of the Wilmington Hope Commission. Corey Priest is a former inmate in the Delaware prison system who has made a successful transition back into the community. Phillip Morgan, the former warden at Wilmington's Howard Young Prison Facility. And Henry Smith, the Assistant Secretary or Deputy Secretary of the State Department of Health and Social Services, who will speak, among other things, to the State Task Force on Reentry. So thank you all very much for being here with us today. Why should, for the viewers at home, and many of whom have not been in trouble with the law, why should they be concerned with the issue of reentry, of someone who got in trouble and kind of have to make do with the fact they got in trouble? Why should we be concerned about it?
Because they're going to be standing in line next to you at Wawa. 97% of everyone incarcerated is going to be released. So do you want them to be a better citizen when they come out, or the same, or worse?
Yeah, I prefer they be a better citizen. How many, I've seen figures something along the lines of 1,200 people who are in the prison system come out of that prison system each year. Is that right in Delaware, or is it more than that?
I've heard that number myself, and it seems to be accurate from the last information I obtained. And it's interesting because we finished the Achievement Center in April, and it happens to be in one of the zip codes that is most affected by the number of men who return from incarceration. Roughly 700 men a year return to 19802. So by happenstance, we got to go
19802, 1, and 5? Yep. Okay, and there are all the zip codes here in the city of Wilmington. Largely, and that's where everybody's coming back into.
Yeah.
Let's go back to your initial question as to why we should care, those of us who are citizens in Delaware, for those who've gotten into trouble. When individuals get into trouble, to the extent that they're required to be incarcerated, it means, first of all, that they've wreaked havoc on one of us, the citizens of Delaware. And that's a real cost that citizens pay. But in addition to that, citizens pay a pretty high financial cost. To operate, for example, our prison system, the Department of Corrections receives some $260 million a year in public support. So those are financial costs that go beyond the cost of arrest, which involves police forces across the state, incarceration, which involves a pretty expensive judicial system. We should care because we're making those kinds of investments, and what we want is to receive a better return on the investment. When individuals are arrested and they're released and simply recycled back into the system, citizens are paying that cost over and over and over again. So it's not a matter of altruism. It's a matter of practicality. We have got very good reasons as to why we want to focus on
All right, so
this.
it's a big ticket item when it comes to the state budget in terms of the taxpayer money. But does Delaware care? Does Delaware as an institution, our elected officials, our branches of government, do we care? I asked the question because I've seen some numbers from 2004, which now that's 10 years ago, so I want to bring us up to speed. But back then, Delaware was ranked 47th in terms of obstacles to someone successfully reentering society in terms of, well, this was a study that was done. Does Delaware care?
In terms of government, I would say that I'm seeing an increasing caring about this issue. When the governor came into office in 2009, one of his first order of business was Executive Order 7, which created a program, an initiative that we now call IADAPT. IADAPT involves several of our state agencies, including my department, the Department of Health and Social Services, the Department of Corrections, the Department of Labor, Department of Education, all working collaboratively on this issue of reentry. My department has also been involved in working with the Hope Commission, where Charles serves as the executive director. I also serve, for example, on a task force that was recently created by the governor looking at what will happen to youngsters when they leave the juvenile system. So there's another task force. So I'm seeing, as I said, an increasing level of caring and a more coordinated effort at trying to address this extremely complex issue.
Yeah, as I said to you before the program, we began taping, you know, it's one of those issues where if we could get our arms around it, it's a complex issue, multifaceted, as I said in the introduction. But, you know, here's the warden with us, and although you're retired now.
June 1st.
June 1st?
Yes.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
But the warden here, help me, you know, again, maybe it's just me, and I've grown up here in Delaware, born and raised, and maybe I just have the old way of thinking, but I'm understanding you to be a more progressive warden in the sense of what you saw happening inside the facilities and what needs to happen for people who are incarcerated.
Well, it's not a simple answer. Delaware is a unified system, so whether you get 1 day or you get the death sentence, you come to the state system because we have no county system. So a facility like Howard R. Young is tremendously busy with the detentioner population or the jail population, if you will. Statistically speaking, a year or more, you're considered a prisoner. So there's a massive turnover just in the in and out. Delaware is also a very, very tough state on its citizens. We incarcerate a lot of people in this state. Yeah. Almost always in the top 10 in the country. So I guess I would ask you if you feel safer because we incarcerate so many people.
Well, I don't know that we do. I mean, look, we're sitting here in our biggest city, in our first state, and we have a bad crime situation here. So I guess I don't feel as safe as I would like to.
And then how much support does the person who has served 3 or 5 years or 7 years, how much support do they have when they come out? How much family support? How much community support? What have they done better while they've been incarcerated? You know, you have all those issues with different groups. Should they leave there better with a better trade than someone who's working hard and paying their bills on the street and is crime-free? You have those ongoing issues about what should we do and how much should we do and how much taxpayers' dollars should be put into it. Yeah. But when they do come out, they're going to be with you. That's the reality. Yeah. And as Mr. Smith mentioned, the whole cost factor, I mean, at some point, when you look at what it costs to incarcerate someone and when you look what it costs to send someone to private school, I mean, it's one of the things we did at Young was start what we called the private boarding school. The whole housing unit was education. 24/7. They couldn't work, they couldn't do anything else, all they could do was education. Firm believer that we have a captive audience and they should leave there better than they came out.
Well, I applaud you. Corey, help me understand a little bit. Take us through your situation. You were in prison. Can you tell us a little bit about how you got there? And now I want to hear about you trying to come out and re-enter society.
Absolutely. I was incarcerated in 2008 on traffic and marijuana charge. Okay. Ultimately bailed out and started my sentence in 2009. You know, the time I was in there, for me, in order to get out to be successful, I had to change my way of thinking. You know, and a lot of folks think that reentry is just the time when you release from prison, but it starts way before then. It starts when you're sitting on a bunk thinking about how you're going to be successful on the outside. So for me, and I can speak for myself, is that the phone calls I've made was to solidify, you know, my support on the outside, you know, and whether it's my mentor, my family, you know, and trying to get employment and solidify my housing and things of that nature. And that's when, you know, the transformation for me started while I was inside and not waiting till I got released from prison.
Right. Well, I can imagine, now I'll ask this question, I'm not going to assume anything, but when you went in, and to think about it for just a moment, you're in prison for marijuana?
Yeah.
Wow, and if we were in Colorado, if I'm serious, if we're in Colorado, then your life is not any different. I mean, in theory.
In
right?
theory, absolutely.
All right, so anyway, unfortunately, we're in Delaware. No, I don't mean unfortunately, but we're in Delaware when it comes to marijuana. And yet, all right, so you're sitting there on the bunk, but when you went in, it's not like you were making all the money in the world.
Right.
And you had all the education in the world you wanted, and so on and so forth. So you had some deficiencies going in, and whatever reason you got in there. So now you're sitting there thinking of, okay, well, where am I weak? What do I need? What do I need to improve myself in? Because I'm about to head on out.
Right.
Were you able to find something to help you in prison?
Yeah, absolutely. I was call it a mandatory worker, but throughout my time in prison, I worked in commissary, and I worked down booking and receiving, which gave me the tools, to be in a work environment. Although it was prison.
Yeah.
And then I became a mandatory worker, and I was the head of maintenance down at the Webb Correctional Facility. And that I was never in maintenance on the outside, but I learned the tools in there to change light bulbs and paint and work the grounds. So it gave me some sort of skills to work with on the outside.
There's some folks who get into the prison system here in Delaware that are so hopeless. In other words, they're so deep down into whatever it is that is causing them to get into a life of crime that they're not even looking. They're not even necessarily hopeful as far as getting out. They're thinking, well, some people even think this might be better for me than the outside.
But the fact of the matter is, while you're in prison, while you're in jail, Gander Hill, whether it's Gander Hill, Smyrna, or SCI, you still form relationships with the folks in there, whether it's the classification team, whether it's the warden or the deputy warden, whoever. You got to form those relationships because you still need to navigate through the system in there.
Right.
And
see, the thing about it is that crime, prison, in economic terms, they're what you call lagging indicators, okay? They're factors that drive individuals to engage in crime. And I'd really like for Charles Madden to comment, because I think that Charles is the executive director of the Hope Commission. I happen to serve on the commission. And I think that we're doing some very exciting things at the commission to address some of what I call the leading indicators, those factors that drive individuals into doing things that are counter to societal expectation. It's a really exciting agenda.
All right, it's a wonderful lead-in, and thank you, Henry, for that, because we're going to take a short break, and when we come back, then I'm going to begin with Charles, because we want to talk about the Achievement Center and some of those exciting things that are happening. I sort of set it up. I questioned, whether Delaware cares. I've got to tell you, in researching this issue, boy, it does seem like Delaware cares. They're from the courts to nonprofit agencies that are out there. It's amazing what's been set up to deal with the reentry issue. But we'll deal with all that when we come back in just a moment. Thanks for being here. And we're back on Issues. We thank you for being with us today. We're discussing the issue of reentry. What happens when people who are incarcerated in the prison system here in Delaware are preparing to leave the prison system and then reenter society? How prepared are they, and what services are there? What resources are there out there for them? Well, there's something called the Achievement Center. And Charles Madden, who's with the Wilmington Hope Commission, Charles, tell us a little bit about this new Achievement Center.
So I'll try to add some context because there's a lot being said, and this is an extremely complex issue. And before we got started, actually, how long we had on the show, and we got 30 minutes. So it's really hard to cover such a vast topic in 30 minutes. But just dating back to where this began to get some appeal, to the signal that Delaware cared. So going back to 2009, where Governor Markell signed Executive Order 7, creating IADAP at Howard Young, it really gave the state sort of this boost of energy around how do we support guys who are returning from incarceration. Specifically, IADAP does most of its work prior to release. And then there's this need once a young man is released from incarceration to go out into the community and get some additional supports. And so we began to look at this issue right around that time and really try to determine what would be the best way to go about doing this. And what we did as an organization is began to go across the country, looking at different programs that worked, inviting other programs here, And one of the things we felt was important in this process was to give guys a place that they can call their own. So that's the Achievement Center. So we view the Achievement Center as a place that guys who are returned from incarceration to Wilmington can come and feel like this is their welcoming space.
So it's like I've read it's one-stop shopping, or if you will. In other words, you're going to have all the resources in one facility?
Yes, so that's the idea. So, part of the challenge for guys who are returning is transportation, housing, employment, a number of different things that they're faced with trying to get addressed when they don't really have skills and support systems to do so. And when you do have those systems out in the community, which they do exist, guys have trouble getting to those facilities. They have trouble being a priority when they get there. So we thought, hey, if we could just improve on the efficiency by bringing as many of those services in one location, we would certainly improve on the results for guys who are coming back. Then we wanted to sort of take that to another level and look at what works. So there's a lot of conversation about evidence-based practices. There's lots of conversation about what works in reentry. And those conversations we've taken very seriously. So what we did is look at this, what I call from a more scientific approach. If you think about going to a doctor for an ailment, your doctor puts you through a number of assessments to determine what might be causing your ailment. So what we try to do is look at what are the underlying reasons why someone is chronically incarcerated, right? And many of them have to do with all of those sort of issues that we talked about earlier, employment, housing, et cetera. But a lot of it, as Corey talked about, is thinking and who you associate with. So what we try to do is address those issues at the Achievement Center in addition to offering those other services that you talked about. What we've done is say we look at what the science has said works. So to me, science is what is replicable. What can we do that we can replicate and predict some results for? Ultimately, our measure of success is a reduction in recidivism.
Yeah, because and again, if we can stop people coming back into the system, obviously there's that cost factor again to the taxpayers. Corey, if you had something like the Achievement Center when you were coming out, I mean, do you know that would have made your life different? Or, because it seemed to me when you were talking to me earlier, you kind of had to pick and choose how you got yourself prepared.
Right, absolutely. Yeah, it would have definitely helped me. When you think about the Achievement Center, not only do they address those issues, but they address like the thinking, your peers, and then just the place. It's amazing when you walk in, you feel like it's home. If you get a chance, you can go by there and you just see the color schemes on the wall, the pictures on the wall, and the staff there is warm and engaging.
Yeah.
So and it's all in one spot. You're addressing the substance abuse, mental health, the employment, case managers there, and peers there also.
I think as both Charles and Corey are pointing out, there are multiple issues that need to be addressed. One of the very important elements in the Achievement Center is the use of case managers. It's individuals who are assigned to work with Corey and individuals like Corey and just navigating this maze. They're not out there on their own trying to access resources that are absolutely critical to preventing them from going in. So that's a really important element in the Achievement Center.
And I think the other part that's I don't want to say unique, but critical to what we think will be success is the infusion of subject matter experts. So, Phil Morgan has been on the board for some time, and he sort of helps us determine what would be a good route in dealing with our guys. The other piece that's really critical, that I think, to helping guys is to building that relationship. And what we've done to that end is, as Henry mentioned, we have case managers. We call them reentry navigators, but we also have peers. So we've infused a number of peers in our facility who work for the Achievement Center. So we've got guys who have come out, shown some success, and they will be a good sort of measuring stick for our guys who are coming into the facility. They relate, they understand the challenges that guys are facing, and when they may not necessarily relate to a professional staff member, clinician, they can always talk to one of the peers to help navigate this.
When does this all happen, by the way? What is the status of the Achievement Center right now?
So what we've done is, and I talked about this medical example, and it's a good example because I think people understand it. We see ourselves as specialists, is the best way I can describe it. So we are taking referrals. We're not a walk-in, so people can't just walk in off the street to get service at the Achievement Center. You have to be referred. And our three primary sources of referral right now will be Reentry Court, will be the Department of Corrections, and TASC. So if you are referred by one of those agencies, you will present to the Achievement Center. There will be an assessment. That assessment will determine what your unique needs are. So you may have some issues around substance abuse. You may need a GED. So there may be any number of issues that you may need to address to help you facilitate your return to the community. And that's all situated in one place. And there's an expectation that you would be sort of in programming or in services at the Achievement Center for generally 6 to 9 months. Now, you're always welcome to come back, but 6 to 9 months is generally your matriculation from beginning to sort of graduation. And at that point, we feel like if you've gone through all the service successfully, the likelihood of you returning back to prison is reduced.
Right.
And as I said earlier, our ultimate measure is reduction in recidivism.
Why, if I look around the landscape in Delaware and I look at the warden, who again had the foresight to kind of know some of the things that needed to be done in the prison system. I look over here to the deputy secretary, who's serving on now 2 task forces, one for the younger folks and one for the adult, those incarcerated in the adult system. And I see the court, the reentry court you just mentioned, a Delaware Center for Justice. I can go through a whole list. Why then? Why are the recidivism rates still too high in Delaware? From what I've seen, they are. I guess I could just ask the question: why are they still high? If we have all this effort out there and all this awareness, is it too new? Is the Achievement Center going to be maybe the thing that helps us break through a little bit? I'm a little confused about some of the stats I'm looking at.
So I don't think there's an easy answer to that question. I will
Okay.
tell you that this issue began to receive a lot of attention in the last 5 years or so. So I think in that respect it's relatively new in terms of what we're trying to do to combat this issue. I will tell you that the numbers are unacceptable. But as you said, if we can wrap our arms around this, there are probably a number of different issues we can wrap our arms around. I will tell you from a Wilmington perspective that the overwhelming majority of black and brown men have had a run-in with the system. So you ask why it's important, because as Phil said, you're probably going to be standing in line with the guy who's just returning. You're more likely to be living next door to a guy who has had some issues, or at least the guy who's walking up and down your block has had some challenges with the system. So we got to care because they're around us. They've become the face of our city in many respects. So we really got to be able to do something to help address this.
John, I think what we need to do is change the focus. We're always talking about making someone successful. And I think good public safety is making offenders successful. And many times we think good public safety is violating them or locking them up or finding another reason to put them back in.
You are.
So
that is true.
So good public safety to me is giving them a skill set, whether it's the mental health issues that 20-25% of everyone incarcerated has mental health issues, whether it's giving them some housing that's really appropriate where they aren't fearful at night what their brother's bringing in the house or their uncle's bringing in the house. So you have a safe environment where they can go to Achievement Center and talk to someone saying, I'm not sure what to do, I don't want to violate probation, but this is occurring at my house. Giving them skill sets to say, how do you, even though we don't have to say we have a prior felony on the application now, how do you prepare them for their job interview when that question comes up? All those skill sets, as Charles mentioned, none of them are easy to deal with, but we have to do a better job of improving them for good public safety.
And
I like that thought.
And put it all in a nutshell, we just need to focus on pro-social behaviors. I think that's what the Achievement Center is geared to do. Because you figure, if you come home from jail, and not to rag on most reentry agencies or what have you, all they think about is employment. But the focus for the Achievement Center is to make them employability, make them sustain the job, get a job, sustain the job, keep the job. And then, so we're working on pro-social behaviors here and their peers and, their attitudes, because without that, you can just give me a job, but if my boss tells me to do something, am I going to do it with the respect that I need to do to keep the job and, keep everything going?
Let me ask you, let me try to explore something by using you as an example for just a moment. How old were you when you went into prison?
28.
28, okay, so for 28 years, you build up certain values, beliefs, attitudes, your actions, and then how long did you stay in?
2 years.
2 years, okay. And so whatever, you would kind of build up whatever for 28 years. So you were in sort of, that was your lot in life, if you will, when you went in. And so I think part of the problem here is not that we shouldn't try, but we're trying to then take a person who's maybe had 20 years or so of living in a particular situation and try to change that as they go back out. That's tough to do in like either a short period of time, or is it, or Or
So-
do you see what I'm
No, I
getting
get
at?
it. And so here's the thing why we should care, right? And Henry can talk to this much more intelligently because of his time with the kids department. But what I like to think about is this. The guys who we sort of want to throw away are generally the guys who are the fathers and the most influential are these young kids that are in these neighborhoods. So to the extent that we can get them to support their need, their influence on the neighborhood goes tenfold. So I always say the greatest mentor I've ever had was my father. And so to the extent that I talk to guys in the prison, the first thing they talk about is their experiences with their children. And they talk about the lessons they passed on to their kids. And those lessons are very different than the lessons that were passed on to me. And so I think we've got to expose our guys to a different experience. And what we find is they go back to neighborhoods upon release and they go back to the same situations.
Yeah.
And so how are they able to really influence the behavior of their kids differently than what they've already been seeing, because what they see in these neighborhoods becomes so normal.
Right.
And we've really got to change the trajectory there. So when we talk about reentry, I think about it more from just helping our guys. What I say is what we're actually really doing is strengthening families.
Yeah.
So to the extent that we strengthen families, we build stronger communities. So ultimately for us, the measure is recidivism, but what we're really trying to do is strengthen these families so we have better and safer communities.
Right.
One of the things, John,
We're coming up on the end of the program, and I apologize for that, but go right ahead.
you were alluding to what appears to be the intractability of the problem, that we've begun to make more investment. As Charles said, over the past 5 years, 6 years, we've seen more conscientious effort around dealing with the issue of reentry. As I look at the service delivery system, the front end prevention, let's try to prevent kids or folks from getting in trouble in the first place. Then we've got intervention, then we've got the reentry. Where the least investments have been made over time, front end, back end, prevention, reentry. And the problem has gotten to an extent right now where we're simply investing an inordinate amount of resources on intervention. You mentioned this young man, Corey. He is consuming resources because he was smoking marijuana. Now, that sort of thinking, I think we need to rethink, okay? We need to rethink how do we invest those limited resources. I think in a number of instances, and he certainly has more experience than I do at this, but in a lot of, from my perspective, a lot of the resources being invested on things like the marijuana.
Yeah.
We need to rethink how do we use those resources more on the front end to invest more on prevention and to invest more on places like the Reentry Center. I think as we do that, we'll see ourselves gaining more traction and more success around this whole.
All right, listen, the time has slipped away. And, I like to think as a homegrown Wilmingtonian and Delawarean that Delaware's done a lot of good things and done it the right way over the years. And I'd like to think that beginning with our governor, when, as you say, it was one of his first actions was to recognize this Governor Markell. I would like to think, and with the Achievement Center here, that we're going to come back together now in a number of years, and we're actually going to see some results, and we're going to see some difference here in lower recidivism rates, more success stories out there among people like Corey, and I just kind of have that sense of something positive happening. And I hope you all. I think you all agree.
Yes.
I mean, you all are. I know this is a tough issue, but you're all very excited about this issue, which I think is important. We got to run, and that's all the time we have for today's program. We hope this has opened your eyes to some of the challenges of the prisoner reentry process. So, if you have any thoughts on this discussion, please tweet them to @WITN22 WILM, #issues22, or post your comments on this video's YouTube page. For WITN 22 and Wilmington City Council, I'm John Rago. Thanks so much for being here.